In today's conversation, we talk about courage, growing edges, and the ever growing realization that being a whole and healthy human is integral to the effective pursuit of justice.
This is Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracie,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin and Tracie Guy-Decker.
In a complex world, change takes courage.
Wholehearted relationships can keep us accountable. So one of the things that I'm really thinking about in the ways in which you've been kind of pushing yourself, I've been thinking about the way, I've been thinking about what courage is and what bravery looks like, and thinking about it as, we have talked before when we talked about Musar, we talked about a person's soul curriculum, that everyone has their own growing edge.
I've been thinking about this so much.
Mine will be different than yours, which will be different than our partners, which will be different than our friends. They're all it's all unique.
Yes. And
so I've been thinking about courage and bravery in that kind of way. Like, what is my soul curriculum for
like
courage?
Relative. Right. Mm-hmm. And also, right.
Mm. And personal. And so like some of the things that for you has been about like being more public about your mystical, spiritual, earth-based, from your indigenous heritage kind of ways of thinking and moving and being. And
you said that's so lovely.
Oh, did you like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Sorry, please continue.
And well, I actually have been realizing that my growing edge, my courage growing edge is different, but not completely dissimilar to yours. And so in the spirit of that courage, I'm going to tell a story. So
I love story time with Tracie.
I think regular listeners, I think regular listeners may already know that I have within the past year taken up a karate practice. So I'm studying Sado karate, which is a specific form of karate here in Maryland, outside of Baltimore. And the Sado founder prizes meditation. Mindfulness is important to Sado practice. And so we meditate at the beginning and end of every class, but it's 30 seconds or a minute. But on the first Thursday of every month, my instructor, at the end of our session, we actually have a full 10-minute sit. And the first Thursday in July, in that sit, I was using some of the sort of meditative language that I've actually shared with our participants. So I was
in grounded and growing,
right? Mm-hmm. So I was connecting my breath to the divine, thinking about the connection of breath and the divine, coming from God breathing life into Adam, but other things as well. And so my mantra, if you will, was breathe in God and breathe out pain. Breathe in God, breathe out limits. And I actually was thinking specifically of like the things that I allow, the fear that I allow to keep me small. So breathe in God, breathe out fear in this 10-minute sit. And by the end of the sit, it's hard for me to even articulate it because I achieved that sort of sense of loss of self almost, that I was God and I was breath breathing itself. And, so was everyone else in the room. We were all part of the same breath breathing itself. And it was amazing. And it's very hard for me to, I am actually dipping into courage in order to say this all out loud into a microphone that's going to go out to who knows how many people, because that kind of, I don't even know what to call it. Transcendence, that kind of experience is not one that my intellectual academic self has been trained to talk about as something that happens to me, right? Like when I was in divinity school, I talked about mystical experiences all the time, but there were things other people had that I studied, not something that I could actually or at least not admit experiencing. And so, and thank you for the opportunity for me to live into a growing edge here And I'm going to bring it back to, this podcast is called Juice Talk Racial Justice. So I'm going to bring it back to that foundation for us.
Before you do, can I have a brief Tracie appreciation moment?
Of course.
Shamati, I hear you. Tracie, thank you for sharing that. I'm so touched by that. And what you just said, I can't remember the exact phrase you said, but something you just said a moment ago was at the heart of why it's been so hard for me to figure out how to talk about it publicly. And in that story, and this is why we're just such a great partnership, is because through your analysis and your perspective, you break things down in such an approachable way. You also spoke to one of the other things that I didn't think about quite as much, that is very much what I'm grappling with, is that so much of what I'm wanting to give and share is profoundly experiential. And it's like in Buddhism, there's the metaphor of don't mistake the finger for the moon, and that there's a pathway there, but that at some point you are able to access this thing that is not graspable, that it's, you know, and so I really just appreciated the beauty of what you shared and the profound courage. I was in hiding about this for 10 years. So the fact that you had this, and so I'm also a little proud of myself in some ways, that hopefully perhaps I had a wee bit of a part in helping to create the safety, but still to me, I really respect you and admire you for that, because with my conditioning and also with the layers of race on top of different things and fighting for just fundamental belonging in the earlier part of my career and inclusion, as I was having these different encounters, I literally just thought, like, there's no way I can ever talk about this publicly. And I had to go through 2 years of healing to get to that. And so I'm Shamati, I'm proud of you. And so you wanted to loop it back to the podcast. So
yeah, thank you. Thank you. And you definitely had a role also, as not just in creating safety, but also as a model, because you've been doing it. I've been watching you do it for 2 years. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And looping it back to the foundation of our podcast, I am becoming more and more convinced the more we work together, April, that experience like that one that I just described in my, post karate class sit is not something that's happening separate and different and divorced from my work for justice. Yes. I think I am more and more and more convinced that leaning into and allowing myself to have moments like that will make me a better, more effective, more grounded, more successful worker for justice.
And more courageous too.
I have clear. Yes. I have greater compassion for myself and for everything around me because of those experiences. I also this is not a switch I'm going to be able to flick and turn it back on, but I know it's there. I know I can access it, so that in those moments of just rage and frustration at the way the world is, I can tap into that will help me accept how it is and then move it, do what I can to move it toward where I think it ought to be. And I'm like, the more that you and I work together and I keep going down these what I thought were two separate paths, I'm realizing they're actually just different ways of looking at the same path.
Exactly. Yay. Tracie. Oh, I could cry, but I've been schwitzing and crying and stuff for days, so I don't want to do that. I'm being extreme. It's been 48 hours. But you
That's days. That's 2 days.
But I'm trying to keep, in any way I can keep in fluids. Anyway, I'm trying to keep fluids in, but I'm air crying right now. And I've been thinking about this over and over again. And I would say yes, and I would add on top of it that to me too, and I've been mindful, especially since I'm already lovingly generatively agitating you on the regular, but something else I've been holding, that this is just, and this is something I've been holding on to that's adjacent to what you said too, is that for me too, as both in terms of getting more courageous, that one, if you're doing deep transformative justice work in general, at some point it's going to have to involve a certain level of mental and or emotional or spiritual wellness, because you're going to need to call on your resources in a more profound way for both healing, and also as you're continuing to evolve in a way that allows you to not lose yourself, you're going to need to be able to dig into those wells. And in terms of anti-racism, that, and I'd seen them as a bit separate, but the more I'd spent time around it, and also it's just more fluid for me. But I'm just realizing, because I've been thinking about it in relationship to you, and I'm also noticing over the last couple of years that I've part of my, do you ever have this where parts of your knowing and certain, like where, to me, part of spiritual and social justice mastery has been deepening learning, and a lot of it's about spreading that learning through other parts of my living, and and so there's parts of me that knows this and there's other parts of me that doesn't, what I'm about to say, but part of it is that to me, and obviously at the root everything, because everything is interconnected, but that the spirituality of which I speak in our racial justice work are deeply intertwined, in the sense that as we move toward mindful decolonization and removing systems of oppression in various BIPOC and indigenous, and specifically indigenous spaces, among other things, and even in terms of some of the indigenous roots of and mystical roots of Jewish spirituality, which I'm learning in the context of Kohenet, these things aren't so distant, right? As you get deeper into these things, part of the depth of racial justice is the profound honoring and reclamation of spirituality outside of traditional institutional religious paradigms, and more about the ineffable, our connection with nature and the world and our inherent divinity, which is also, in terms of B'Tselem Elohim, a key part of Judaism. But that these things are, as I've been doing this work, in part because the world treats it that way, but the more I dive into them, the more I see that they are not necessarily one and the same, although one could say that too, but profoundly complementary, and in service of one another. Because for me, the spirituality that I'm doing, and the practicing awareness of interconnection, and doing engaging in practices like meditation and ascension and other mindful activities that help me make a distinction between my thinking brain and my intuition, or divine insight or spiritual insight. I'm still refining for myself at times whether that voice is my higher self or spiritual guides or the divine. And at some point, it doesn't matter. I can tell it's a wiser voice than my own thinking, right? And so I need to do things to cultivate that. And so that's happening. But for me, the core about the racial justice, they're in deep service of each other. The core of social justice work and racial justice work is just holding the both and. That is very much a part of my spirituality, where I hold two truths and I use them in ways that are helpful for me. So I hold at some time that everything is my spiritual curriculum. So on a certain theoretical spiritual level, even when the worst of things happen to me, I frame it in the context of, this is likely something that my soul wanted and or needed before I entered this journey. But I don't only hold that. I also hold that I'm a human on this earth, and someone hurt me, and I want justice. But I find that balancing those things, that me having that spiritual awareness, greatly helps my healing process, even as I hold, and I am still a human living on earth, and I would like tikkun. I would like there to be teshuva and tikkun. I would like there to be an apology and repair and healing here. And if I can't get it with that other person, then I will seek it out from my circles, etc. But to me, they're interrelated. All of that to say they're interrelated.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I've been, and
in service of one another. And
like a balance. It's a reminder to me of the importance of the balance and the courage. I keep coming back to that, but it's real easy for me to just live in my head, to just only work in the intellectual realm of knowing, which is great and is important. But when that's all I do, then I'm missing many other ways of being. And the balance is, I think the wisdom of balance does feel completely resonant, and somehow the same.
May I add
I'm
a
not
bit more?
exactly sure where I'm going with that.
Yeah, and
So
I'll add
yes,
on
please.
here. And exactly, yeah. And I, you know, so I'm in a spiritual community, and the teacher was talking the other week about, and I loved it, and I'm wanting this, and I think the Jewish and communal, and the communal piece isn't all of, and when it's just human, but also is deeply a part of both my indigenous tribal, like Cherokee, the African piece, and the Jewish piece are all in similar in different ways, deeply communal peoples. And so one of the things that I've been continually seeking out over the course of my journey, and particularly as I've wanted to go public with these things, I've both been working on the teaching, which is part of it for me, part of the spiritual lesson of just standing in my truth, regardless. And for me, before I do that, it feels important to me to anchor in with other teachers and people. And recently I found a couple, and they were already people who were in my orbit, but either I wasn't aware of them, or one of them, in the case of Tosha Silver, she'd been in my orbit before, but I wasn't ready for her teachings yet. And recently I read all of her books last month or so, because she talks a lot about surrender to the divine. And when I encountered that about 8 years ago, I've been wanting to potentially have this be a part of some course material for either some part of Shema at a deeper or higher level of the Grounded and Growing curriculum, and or its own program, where to me there's this interesting interplay that I think people navigate and go through of source or the divine, like these 4 S's. And I've had different graphs, and I could draw the graph of what it looks like for me. And it's also occurred to me that it's different for different people. But there's like source, and then there's this balance over the course of our lives based upon our lived experience with our soul curriculum between solidarity and sovereignty in different times in our lives when these, and then there's also surrender. And for me, I really, over the past few years, invested a lot of time in my healing journey around cultivating sovereignty, which in light of what's happening in the world now is well timed. But that was just where I was. And so when I initially encountered Tosha's work, where she was talking about all of this surrender, I was just at the beginning of a massive healing. I was like, I know you're saying it to the divine, but I've already been violated. I just wasn't able to hear that. But since I've done healing work and have had many different boundaries and practices in place and feel physically and spiritually and psychologically safe, and like my boundaries are in place, now the thought of spiritual surrender feels relieving and safe and okay. And so as I've been encountering her, and also another teacher and wonderful leader who I found through the Jewish Muslim, or the Kohenet Sufi album that Rav Kohenet Taya Mâ Shir produced, Makam Shechina. And I had seen Miriam Hasna's work before. Anyway, so I'm in the spiritual community right now, and both between reading Tosha's books and learning from Miriam and her spiritual community, it's not so much that I'm hearing new things, but just for me, as someone who's deeply communal, even if it's just one other teacher who's experienced, who has a following, it feels really, and also as someone who grew up, who was acculturated in the context of academia. And I recently watched a TikTok about how it's actually about how peer-reviewed journals are a bit of a scam, but I appreciate communal processes and hearing things from different leaders. And one of the things she was teaching that is actually thought I've had, but it was really helpful to hear it from someone who also has, who has seemingly a deeper level of spiritual mastery and knowing. And she was saying that, that a number of people say to do away with the ego, and she just thinks that's not helpful, which is also how I've always felt whenever people say this. It seems, and it's almost always been white people, and often white men, who say this, like, maybe you need to work on your ego. It's kind of like, how I talked to you about how a rabbi once gave a lesson on humility and about, being humble. And I was like, this is a teaching that is very relevant for someone with a lot of power. But for me, as someone who's had to do a lot of work since childhood and even in adulthood to access my voice, this isn't helpful, and so similarly, I just appreciated what she was saying, and it validated what I've been thinking and feeling myself, which is that both are true, that there's a certain that yes, ultimately in a number of ways, all of this is the divine, and we are living in this spirit, in this physical plane where we each are individual, and we don't want to, and we're having a human experience. So to completely lobotomize our conditioning doesn't really make sense either, that we need to keep it in check and engage and get clearer about spirit. Anyway, but
I'm just thinking about the ways in which, the ways in which like interacting with folks who have similar, not identical experiences can be so validating. Like a friend just sent me Alison Bechdel's book, The Secret to Superhuman Strength. And like Bechdel was a karateka, and she's also a cartoonist. And so like there's this one point where she says like she really
had a karate cop.
K-A. It's like someone who practices karate.
Ah, okay.
So she actually achieved black belt in her study, and also was a cartoonist. And there's this one point, it's the Secret to Superhuman Strength is a memoir, part memoir of her use of exercise as a spiritual practice, kind of. I mean, she doesn't put it that way, but that's sort of what she's doing. Anyway, but at one point she says in the book that she started to feel as though both her karate and her cartoons were sort of part of some bigger project. And I read those lines and I'm looking at the page, I'm like, oh,
right. Right.
Yeah. And it was just one of those moments that
so helpful.
And I didn't even know that I was feeling lonely about that until I read those words. And I was like, oh, Alison Bechdel too.
It's just for context. I think some of our regular listeners may know, but one of Tracie's habits for her self-care and also to connect with folks as a secondary piece, and I can let you talk about it, is that she's been doing, when she's inspired, and time she takes breaks and then she picks it back up as she's so inspired, does this process called gratidoodles. And as you heard, she's also doing karate. So that's hence the alignment. And yes.
It's interesting to me too, how like seeing those words on the page and then walking, as I finished the book and sort of was walking around with it percolating in my brain, I was like, wow, Bechdel really has stuff figured out. And then I thought back about it. I was like, no, she's struggling the same ways that I am. She just talked about it. You know, like there was something also validating and like,
and relieving. Also,
yes, that's the word. There's a sense of relief, because my initial was like,
and like support and encouragement on what you're doing. And also like, oh, actually I'm not the only one for whom this is difficult. Like, yes, please continue.
No, that was basically it. There was I had this sense that Bechdel had it figured out, but if you actually read it for where she is, like sometimes it goes great and sometimes it goes, really terribly, and she struggles because she's human. And so humans struggle. It was, anyway, I recommend the book, The Secret to Superhuman Strength.
Yeah, I loved it when I saw that you were reading that, because as you know, I haven't actually finished yet because it really gets into the weeds. I really loved Move Your DNA. And I feel like this is a similar type of book where it's just giving a really fresh, invigorating, inspired perspective that's not in the mainstream about movement and exercise and expanding it and making it more inclusive and also more exciting at the same time. So I was like, oh, cool. I definitely put it on my longer list of books that I might get around to once I read the other
10,000,
several dozen that I've already purchased. Thanks for tuning in. Our show's theme music was composed by Elliot Hammer. You can find this track and other beats on Instagram at Elliot Hammer. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. To join the conversation, visit JewsTalkRacialJustice.com, where you can send us a question or suggestion, access our show notes, and learn more about our team. Take care until next time, and stay humble and keep going.